Rejection doesn't always come with shouting or violence. Sometimes it comes quietly in the way doors close a second too fast, in the way elders stop saying your name, in the way survival becomes something you're expected to earn every single day. Molly Cohen learned that lesson early. She learned it as an Omega. She learned it as a voice no one wanted to hear. And she learned it the night she found a marked pup abandoned in the snow, left there because every pack believed his existence was a mistake. What they didn't know was that one choice made by an Omega they underestimated was about to change a king's destiny forever. Hey, quick question before we go any further. How are you feeling right now? Thank you for being here. Truly. Stories like this only work because people like you choose to listen. I'm building something special on Jasmine Love Tales, and I'm working toward my first 1,000 subscribers. If this story already has you curious, if something in that opening stirred you even a little, please take a second to subscribe, tap the like button, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. It helps this channel grow more than you realize. Alright, let's step into the cold. Chapter 1. Molly Cohen had been rejected 3 times in her life. The first rejection came at birth. Omega. The word settled over her like dust no one bothered to sweep away. In a world where strength determined worth, being born Omega meant starting at the bottom and staying there. Her parents loved her, but even love couldn't shield her from the reality that her rank made her invisible. The second rejection came when she opened her mouth. Omegas were supposed to be gentle, compliant, soft-spoken. Molly was none of those things. She had opinions. Worse, she shared them. When the council made decisions that hurt the vulnerable, she questioned them. When traditions protected cruelty, she pointed it out. Her words were never loud, never aggressive, but they were steady, clear, and impossible to ignore. That made her dangerous. The elders called her disrespectful. The alphas called her difficult. The other Omegas stopped sitting near her during gatherings, afraid her defiance might become contagious. The third rejection came 2 years ago, on a cold November night much like this one. She'd spoken up during a pack meeting. An Omega family had been denied winter rations because the father had missed 3 work rotations due to illness. Molly stood and said what everyone else was thinking but wouldn't say. Punishing sickness seems like poor leadership. The room had gone silent. Alpha Harrell, the pack leader at the time, had stared at her with eyes that held no warmth, no patience, no mercy. Leave, he'd said simply. Before sunrise. No trial, no discussion, just exile. So Molly left. She'd been surviving on the edges of pack territories ever since, moving when she had to, staying invisible when she could. She took odd jobs, mending clothes, preserving food, tending to injuries for travelers who didn't ask questions. She lived in a small cabin on neutral ground, a place too remote for most wolves to bother with. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Tonight, the blizzard had come early and was fierce. Snow fell in thick sheets, turning the forest into a white void. Molly had spent the evening reinforcing her cabin's weak points, stuffing cloth into gaps where wind sliced through. She'd rationed her firewood carefully. 3 more weeks until she could make the trek to the nearest trading post. 3 more weeks of cold, silence, and the kind of hunger that never quite went away. She just settled near the fire, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, when she heard it. A sound, faint, almost swallowed by the wind. Crying. Molly froze, tilting her head. For a moment she thought she'd imagined it. The cold did strange things to the mind, but then it came again, small, broken, desperate. A child. Her instincts flared. Every logical part of her brain screamed at her to stay inside. Going out into a blizzard at night was how people died. Besides, it wasn't her problem. She wasn't part of a pack anymore. She had no obligation to anyone, but the crying continued. Molly closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and stood. "This is going to be stupid," she muttered to herself, pulling on her worn coat. She pushed open the door. The wind slammed into her immediately, stealing her breath. Snow stung her face like needles. She squinted into the white chaos, following the sound. It led her toward the boundary, the invisible line that separated neutral ground from pack territory. And there, curled against the base of a tree, was a pup. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old. His clothes were soaked through, clinging to his small frame. His lips were blue. His entire body shook violently. But it was the mark on his forearm that made Molly's heart stop. A black sigil, stark against his pale skin. Circular, intricate, unmistakable. She knew what it meant. Every wolf knew what it meant. The marked ones were cursed. Legends said they brought ruin to any pack that sheltered them. Packs rejected marked pups on sight, leaving them at boundaries as offerings to fate. It was tradition. It was the law. It was murder dressed up as superstition. The pup's eyes opened slowly. They were dark, glassy, with cold and fear. He looked at Molly, and his cracked lips moved. "Please," he whispered. Molly knelt in the snow. She didn't think about the consequences. She didn't think about the danger. She didn't think about anything except the fact that this was a child, and he was dying. She scooped him into her arms. He was terrifyingly light. "I've got you," she said quietly. "You're safe now." The pup's head dropped against her shoulder, and he went limp. Molly turned and ran back toward her cabin, the blizzard clawing at her with frozen fingers. She didn't look back. She didn't see the eyes watching from the shadows, but they were there, and they would remember. Chapter 2. The pup didn't wake for 2 days. Molly kept him close to the fire, wrapped in every blanket she owned. She checked his pulse every few hours, relieved each time she felt the faint flutter beneath her fingertips. His breathing was shallow but steady. She rationed her supplies carefully. Broth made from bone scraps, melted snow for water, strips of dried meat softened over steam. On the 3rd morning, his eyes opened. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, blinking slowly, as if trying to remember where he was. Then his gaze shifted to Molly, who sat nearby mending a torn sleeve. "You're awake," she said gently. The pup didn't respond. His expression was guarded, wary. He'd learned not to trust easily. Molly didn't push. She set aside her sewing and poured a cup of weak broth, then moved slowly toward him. "You need to drink," she said. "Just a little." He hesitated, then accepted the cup with shaking hands. He drank carefully, as if afraid it might be taken away. When he finished, he handed the cup back and whispered, "Why? Why what? Why did you take me?" Molly met his gaze. "Because leaving a child in the snow felt like bad manners." The pup blinked. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Over the next few days, he began to speak more. His name was Jude. He didn't have a surname Omegas and outcasts rarely did. He'd been born into a small pack near the northern border, but when the mark appeared on his arm at age 3, everything changed. They tried 4 different packs. Each one refused him. The elders would take one look at the mark and shake their heads. "We can't risk it," they'd say. "The old laws are clear." His parents tried to hide him, but pack law didn't allow secrets. Eventually, the council discovered the truth. They were given a choice: abandon the pup or be exiled along with him. His parents had cried. They'd held him. They'd whispered apologies. And then they'd left him at the boundary in the snow. Jude recounted all of this in a flat, emotionless tone, as if he were describing the weather. Molly's chest ached with a fury she couldn't name. "They told me I was bad luck," Jude said quietly. "They said if I stayed, the pack would suffer." "They lied," Molly said firmly. Jude looked at her, his dark eyes searching. "How do you know?" "Because I've spent my whole life being told I was wrong for existing," Molly replied. "And I'm still here." Jude considered this. Then he nodded slowly, as if filing that information away for later. Molly knew she couldn't keep him hidden forever. Her cabin was too close to pack territories. Sooner or later, someone would notice. But for now, she focused on keeping him warm, fed, and safe. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Jude spoke again. "Do you think anyone will ever want me?" Molly's throat tightened. She set down the bowl she'd been cleaning and moved to sit beside him. "I want you," she said simply. Jude stared at her, eyes wide. "I don't know what will happen next," Molly continued. "I don't know if we'll be safe here, or if we'll have to run. But I'm not leaving you. Not ever." Jude's lower lip trembled. Then he leaned into her side, and Molly wrapped an arm around him. They sat like that for a long time, the fire crackling softly between them. But peace never lasted. 3 days later, Molly woke to the sound of footsteps outside. She moved to the window, careful to stay out of sight. Through the frosted glass, she saw them 4 wolves in human form, wearing the dark green cloaks of the Connor Pack Patrol. Her heart sank. They knocked on the door. Hard. "Open up," a voice called. "We know you're in there." Molly glanced at Jude, who'd woken and was now sitting up, eyes wide with fear. She put a finger to her lips, then moved to the door and opened it just enough to speak through the gap. "Can I help you?" she asked calmly. The lead patrol wolf, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his jaw, looked her over with cold assessment. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," he said. "You're harboring someone who doesn't belong here." "I'm harboring a child," Molly replied evenly. "Is that illegal?" "Depends on the child." Molly's jaw tightened. "He's 5 years old. He was freezing to death. I helped him." The man's gaze shifted past her, toward Jude. His expression hardened. "That's a marked pup. That's a child. Pack law says marked pups are to be refused entry. No exceptions." "Good thing I'm not part of a pack, then." The man stepped closer, his tone dropping into something dangerous. "You're on neutral ground now. But if you cross into Connor territory with that pup, you'll be detained. If you cross into Tyler territory, you'll face the Alpha King himself." Molly held his gaze. "Then I won't cross." The man studied her for a long moment, as if deciding whether she was brave or foolish. Finally, he stepped back. "Stay out of pack business," he said, "or it'll become your business real fast." He and his patrol turned and disappeared into the trees. Molly closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. Jude's small voice came from behind her. "Are they going to take me away?" Molly turned and knelt in front of him. "No," she said firmly. "Not while I'm breathing." Jude looked at her with an expression far too old for his age. Then he whispered, "You're really brave." Molly managed a tired smile. "Or really stubborn. Maybe both. Definitely both." But as the day wore on, Molly knew the truth. Staying here wasn't an option anymore. If the patrols knew about Jude, it was only a matter of time before the council got involved. And councils didn't negotiate with exiled Omegas. She had 2 choices: run farther into the wilderness, where survival would be even harder, or take a risk she'd been avoiding for 2 years. She could go to the Tyler pack. Alpha King Curtis Tyler ruled the largest pack in the region. His territory was vast, his authority absolute, He was known for being fair but unyielding, a leader who valued order above all else. Molly had never met him, but she'd heard the stories, and if there was even a chance he might listen, if there was even a sliver of hope that he might protect Jude, she had to try. That night, she packed what little they had. "We're leaving?" Jude asked. "We're taking a trip," Molly said carefully, "to see someone important." "Is he scary?" Molly paused, then glanced at Jude. "Probably." Jude nodded seriously. "Okay." At dawn, they set out. The journey to Tyler territory took 3 days. Molly kept them off main paths, moving through dense forest and rocky terrain. Jude never complained, though she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. On the 3rd evening, they reached the border, and that's when they were surrounded. 6 wolves stepped out from the trees, forming a tight circle around them. These weren't patrol scouts, these were enforcers. Their eyes glowed faintly in the fading light, their postures radiating authority. The leader stepped forward, tall, sharp-featured, with eyes like steel. "State your business," he said. Molly lifted her chin. "I'm here to speak with Alpha King Curtis Tyler." The man's gaze dropped to Jude, and his expression shifted recognition, then something darker. "You brought a marked pup into Tyler territory. I brought a child who needs protection. The law says." "I know what the law says," Molly interrupted. "But I'm asking you to take us to your king anyway." The man studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he gestured to his team. "Bind her hands. Bring them both." Molly's wrists were tied quickly, efficiently. Jude stayed close to her side, his small hand clutching her coat. As they were led deeper into Tyler territory, Jude leaned up and whispered, "Is he always this scary?" One of the enforcers heard him, and despite everything, the corner of his mouth twitched. "Before we continue, pause with me for a moment. If you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever been told to stay quiet, stay small, or know your place, this story is for you." If Molly's courage is already hitting close to home, please subscribe to Jasmine Love Tales, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, have you ever stood your ground when it would have been easier to walk away? All right. Let's see what it costs an Omega to defy a king. Chapter 3. Curtis Tyler had been king for 7 years, and he was tired. Not physically, though. The endless council meetings, border disputes, and ceremonial obligations certainly tested his endurance. No, this was a different kind of exhaustion. The kind that settled into your bones when you realized that leadership meant being buried alive under tradition, paperwork, and expectations. He sat now in his office, staring at a stack of documents that seemed to reproduce overnight. Permit requests, territorial agreements, complaints about resource distribution, a formal inquiry into whether the Autumn Harvest Festival should include a 3rd day of ceremonies. Curtis rubbed his temples. 7 years. He'd inherited the title young after his father's sudden death. Back then, he'd been idealistic, full of plans to strengthen the pack for the future, to make leadership more accessible. He'd wanted to be the kind of king people respected, not feared. But tradition was a beast with teeth. Every reform he proposed was met with resistance. Every attempt to simplify systems was blocked by council members who cited laws older than anyone could remember. So Curtis learned to play the game. He enforced the rules. He maintained order. He became exactly what the pack needed him to be: steady, predictable, untouchable. It worked. The Tyler pack thrived under his leadership. But somewhere along the way, Curtis stopped recognizing himself. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Enter," he said. Captain Ledger Weber stepped inside, his expression unreadable. Ledger was Curtis's head enforcer, a man who valued efficiency and loyalty in equal measure. "We have a situation," Ledger said. Curtis set down his pen. What kind of situation? An Omega crossed into our territory an hour ago. She's carrying a marked pup. Curtis went still. Marked pups were rare. Most didn't survive long enough to become a problem. The few that did were rejected immediately, left at boundaries according to ancient law. Bringing one into Tyler territory was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Where is she now? Curtis asked. Detention hall. She's requesting an audience with you. Curtis raised an eyebrow. She requested an audience? Yes, sir. Did she say why? She says the pup needs protection. Curtis leaned back in his chair, considering. And the pup? Approximately 5 years old, marked on the right forearm. No pack affiliation. Curtis exhaled slowly. Bring them to the council chamber. I'll hear her out. Ledger hesitated. Sir? The council won't approve. The law is clear. I know what the law says, Ledger. Curtis's tone sharpened. But I'm not in the habit of making decisions about children without at least hearing the full story. Bring them. Ledger nodded and left. Curtis stood, straightened his coat, and made his way to the council chamber. It was a large, formal room with high ceilings and stone walls lined with tapestries depicting pack history. A long table dominated the center, surrounded by chairs reserved for council members. Curtis took his place at the head of the table and waited. 15 minutes later, the doors opened. An Omega entered first, flanked by 2 guards. Her wrists were bound, but her posture was straight, her gaze steady. She was thin, too thin, with dark hair pulled back into a practical braid. Her clothes were worn but clean, and there was a sharpness to her eyes that immediately caught Curtis's attention. Behind her, a small pup walked hesitantly, his hand gripping the edge of her coat. Curtis's gaze dropped to the boy's arm. The mark was unmistakable. The room was silent as Molly and Jude were brought to stand before the table. Curtis studied them both carefully. Your name, he said. Molly Cohen. And the pup? His name is Jude. Curtis nodded slowly. You understand that bringing a marked pup into Tyler territory violates pack law. I understand that pack law values superstition over compassion, Molly replied evenly. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. Curtis felt a flicker of something surprise, maybe, or respect. That's a bold statement, Curtis said. Especially for someone currently in custody. It's an honest one. Curtis leaned forward slightly. Tell me why you're here. Molly met his gaze without flinching. Because Jude was left to die in a blizzard. Because 4 packs rejected him based on a mark he didn't choose. Because I don't have the resources to protect him alone. And because I was told you're a fair leader. Who told you that? Travelers. People who've passed through your territory. Curtis considered this. And you believed them? I'm here, aren't I? A faint smile ghosted across Curtis's face before he could stop it. One of the council members, an older man named Elder Burns, spoke up. Alpha King, this is a waste of time. The law is clear. Marked pups are not to be sheltered. The Omega should be charged with trespassing and the pup returned to neutral ground. Molly's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Curtis glanced at Elder Burns. Return to neutral ground in the middle of winter? The law does not concern itself with weather, Burns replied stiffly. Then perhaps the law should, Curtis said quietly. The room went silent. Curtis turned his attention back to Molly. How long have you been caring for him? 2 weeks. And in that time, has anything catastrophic happened? Molly's expression flickered with something close to humor. We were threatened by a patrol. Does that count? Curtis's mouth twitched. That's a normal Tuesday. Jude, who had been silent until now, looked up at Curtis with wide eyes and whispered to Molly, Is he always this scary? The question was barely audible, but Curtis heard it. So did everyone else. For a moment, The tension in the room cracked. Curtis saw Ledger suppress a smile. Even Elder Burns looked momentarily thrown. Curtis looked down at Jude. "Sometimes," he said seriously, "but only when necessary." Jude nodded, satisfied. Molly's shoulders relaxed just slightly. Curtis straightened. "I'm granting temporary shelter. The pup will remain under observation while I investigate the origins of the mark and the validity of the old laws. Molly Cohen will be housed separately, but will be allowed supervised access to the pup." Elder Burns stood abruptly. "Alpha King, this sets a dangerous precedent." "Then we'll deal with the precedent," Curtis said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This meeting is adjourned." The council members filed out, some reluctantly, others muttering under their breath. Curtis remained seated, watching as guards escorted Molly and Jude out. Just before she left, Molly glanced back at him. Their eyes met, and Curtis felt something shift, something he couldn't quite name. Ledger approached once the room was empty. That was unexpected. Curtis exhaled. "She has a point. About the law? About compassion." Ledger raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Curtis stood. "Assign someone to watch over the pup, and make sure Molly Cohen is housed somewhere decent. She looks like she hasn't eaten properly in weeks." "Understood." As Ledger left, Curtis returned to his office. He sat down, stared at the stack of paperwork, and realized he had absolutely no interest in finishing it tonight. His mind kept returning to the Omega with a steady gaze, and the pup who'd asked if he was always this scary. Curtis smiled despite himself. Then he got to work researching the mark. Chapter 4. Molly was given a small room on the lower level of the main compound. It wasn't much a bed, a chair, a narrow window that overlooked the courtyard, but it was warmer than her cabin, and the mattress didn't have holes in it. She sat on the edge of the bed, still processing everything that had happened. They hadn't killed her. They hadn't exiled her. And somehow, impossibly, the Alpha King had granted them temporary shelter. It felt like a dream. Or a trap. Molly didn't trust easily. She'd learned the hard way that protection often came with conditions. But for now, Jude was safe, and that was all that mattered. A knock on the door made her tense. "Come in," she said cautiously. The door opened, and a young woman entered carrying a tray. She had warm brown skin, curly hair tied back, and an easy smile. "Hi," she said. "I'm Paisley. I work in the kitchens. Alpha King Curtis asked me to bring you something to eat." Molly stared at the tray. Bread, cheese, roasted vegetables, and a bowl of stew that smelled better than anything she'd had in months. Her stomach growled audibly. Paisley set the tray on the small table. "When's the last time you ate?" "Yesterday," Molly said quietly. "Maybe the day before." Paisley's expression softened. "Eat slowly, okay? Your stomach's going to need time to adjust." Molly nodded and moved to the table. She picked up the bowl of stew and studied it carefully, as if expecting it to vanish. Paisley tilted her head. "You okay?" Molly glanced at her. "I'm emotionally preparing myself in case this disappears." Paisley blinked, then laughed softly. "It's not going anywhere. Promise." Molly took a cautious sip. The warmth spread through her chest, and her eyes stung with something that wasn't quite tears. She ate slowly, carefully, savoring every bite. Paisley sat down across from her. "So you're the Omega everyone's talking about. I didn't realize I was that interesting. You brought a marked pup into Tyler territory and demanded an audience with the Alpha King. That's pretty interesting." Molly set down her spoon. "I didn't demand it. I asked." "Same thing, in this pack." Molly studied Paisley carefully. "Are you here to spy on me?" "No," Paisley said easily. I'm here to make sure you don't pass out from hunger. Also, I was curious. About what? About why you'd risk everything for a pup who isn't yours. Molly's expression hardened. He's a child. That's reason enough. Paisley nodded slowly. Not everyone sees it that way. Then not everyone deserves to lead. Paisley smiled. You're going to be in trouble, aren't you? That's what people keep telling me. Over the next few days, Molly was allowed to visit Jude under supervision. He was being housed in a separate building, watched over by a quiet enforcer named Miles. Jude seemed to be adjusting. He had warm clothes, regular meals, and a bed that didn't creak. But he clung to Molly every time she visited. Are you staying? He asked one afternoon. Molly smoothed his hair back. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise. On the fourth evening, Molly was summoned to the council chamber again. This time, Curtis was alone. He sat at the head of the table, reviewing a stack of documents. When Molly entered, he looked up. Sit, he said. Molly hesitated, then took a seat across from him. Curtis set aside the papers. I've been researching the mark. It's older than I thought. What does it mean? I don't know yet, but I'm working on it. He paused, studying her. You look better. Molly raised an eyebrow. Is that a compliment? An observation. I've been eating actual meals. It's a nice change. Curtis's mouth twitched. How long were you on your own? 2 years. That's a long time. It's survivable. Curtis leaned back in his chair. Why were you exiled? Molly met his gaze. I spoke up during a council meeting. Told them punishing a sick Omega for missing work was cruel. They didn't appreciate the feedback, so they threw you out. Before sunrise. Curtis's expression darkened. That's not justice. No, Molly agreed. But it's tradition. Curtis was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm sorry. Molly blinked. For what? For the way you've been treated. By your pack. By the system. Molly's throat tightened. She wasn't used to apologies, especially not from alphas. Thank you, she said quietly. Curtis nodded. Then he reached for something on the table, a folded blanket. Paisley mentioned you've been cold at night. He pushed the blanket across the table. Molly stared at it. You didn't have to. I know. She took the blanket, her fingers brushing his briefly. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through her that she wasn't expecting. Curtis felt it too. She could tell by the way his gaze sharpened, the way his posture shifted just slightly. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them heavy with something unspoken. Finally, Curtis cleared his throat. Get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow. Molly stood. Thank you for everything. Curtis watched her leave, and when the door closed behind her, he sat back in his chair and exhaled slowly. He'd been a king for 7 years. He'd led armies, negotiated treaties, made decisions that affected thousands of lives. But sitting across from an exiled Omega with sharp eyes and quiet defiance, that unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain, and he wasn't sure if that was a problem or something else entirely. Chapter 5. The council reconvened 3 days later. This time, the chamber was packed. Word had spread quickly about the marked pup and the Omega who dared to bring him into Tyler territory. Council members, enforcers, and high-ranking pack members filled the seats, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Curtis sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable. Molly stood in the center of the room, alone. Jude had been left with Miles, much to his protest. Molly had promised she'd return soon. She hoped she could keep that promise. Elder Burns rose from his seat, his voice echoing through the chamber. Alpha King, we've allowed this situation to continue long enough. The law is clear. Marked pups are not to be sheltered within pack territory. The Omega must release the pup, and both must be removed. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Curtis's gaze remained on Molly. "Do you have anything to say?" Molly lifted her chin. "Yes." "Then speak." She took a breath. "I understand that traditions exist for a reason. I understand that laws are meant to protect the pack. But I also understand that fear can be disguised as wisdom, and cruelty can be disguised as order." Elder Burns's face flushed. "You dare?" Curtis raised a hand, silencing him. "Let her finish." Molly's voice steadied. "Jude is 5 years old. He didn't ask to be marked. He didn't ask to be abandoned. He didn't ask for any of this. But he's here, and he's alive. And he deserves the same chance every other pup gets to grow up safe, fed, and wanted." "The mark brings misfortune," another council member said. "It's been documented." "Where?" Molly interrupted. "Show me the documentation. Show me proof that it isn't just stories passed down by people who were too afraid to question them." The room went silent. Curtis leaned forward slightly. "She has a point." Elder Burns sputtered. "Alpha King, with respect. I've spent the last 3 days researching the origins of the mark," Curtis said, his tone calm but firm. "And I've found nothing. No records, no evidence, no historical accounts that prove marked pups cause harm. What I have found is a pattern of rejection, abandonment, and death, all justified by a law no one can explain." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Curtis stood. "So I'm asking you if you want me to exile this pup. Give me a reason beyond tradition. Give me proof. Give me something other than fear." No one spoke. Curtis's gaze swept the room. "That's what I thought." Elder Burns rose again, his voice sharp. "Alpha King, if you defy this law, you set a precedent. Other packs will see it as a weakness. They'll question your authority." "Let them," Curtis said quietly. "I'd rather be questioned for showing compassion than respected for enforcing cruelty." The weight of his words settled over the room like a stone. Molly felt something shift in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. "Hope." Elder Burns opened his mouth to argue further, but Curtis cut him off. "This council is dismissed. Jude will remain under Tyler's protection. Molly Cohen will be granted provisional residency while we continue investigating the mark. Anyone who has a problem with that can bring it to me directly." The room erupted into murmurs, but Curtis didn't wait. He stepped down from the head of the table and walked toward the exit. As he passed Molly, he paused. "You did well," he said quietly. Molly met his gaze. "So did you." Curtis's mouth twitched, and then he was gone. Molly stood alone in the chamber as the crowd slowly dispersed, some shooting her glares, others looking uncertain. Paisley appeared at her side. "You just made the most powerful people in this pack very uncomfortable." Molly exhaled shakily. "Good." Paisley grinned. "I like you." That night, Molly was finally allowed to take Jude back to her quarters for a few hours. He curled up beside her on the narrow bed, his small body warm against her side. "Did the scary man help us?" Jude asked sleepily. Molly smiled. "Yeah, he did." "Is he still scary?" "A little, but I think he's trying." Jude yawned. "That's good." Molly pulled Curtis's blanket over both of them. For the first time in years, she felt something close to safe. Chapter 6. Curtis spent the next 2 weeks buried in the pack archives. The archives were located in the oldest part of the compound, a stone structure that smelled like dust and history. Shelves lined the walls, packed with scrolls, books, and records dating back centuries. Curtis had always respected tradition, but now, for the first time, he was questioning it. He enlisted the help of Estelle Maxwell, the pack's lead historian. She was an older woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, someone who valued truth over comfort. "You're looking for information on the mark," Estelle said, pulling a stack of documents from a high shelf. "Anything you can find," Curtis replied. They worked in silence for hours, combing through records, birth logs, and legal texts. Finally, Estelle stopped. "Curtis," she said slowly, "look at this." She handed him a faded scroll, its edges worn with age. Curtis unrolled it carefully. It was a royal decree, dated over 200 years ago. His eyes scanned the text and then froze. The mark wasn't a curse. It was a sigil, a protection mark, given to members of the royal bloodline during times of upheaval. It was meant to identify heirs, to ensure their survival if the main line was ever threatened. But somewhere along the way, the meaning had been lost. Fear had taken over. Stories had twisted. And what was once a symbol of protection became a symbol of doom. Curtis read the decree twice, his mind racing. "This changes everything," he said quietly. Estelle nodded. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Curtis didn't answer immediately. He thought about Jude, about Molly, about every marked pup who'd been abandoned, rejected, left to die because of a lie. He thought about his role as king not just to uphold tradition, but to protect his people. All of them. "I'm going to tell the truth," Curtis said finally. That evening, he summoned Molly to his office. She arrived cautiously, as she always did, her expression guarded. Curtis gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." Molly sat. Curtis pushed the scroll across the desk. "Read this." Molly's eyes moved over the text. Slowly, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, to something like anger. "This says the mark is protective," she said quietly. "It is. Then why?" "Because fear is easier than truth," Curtis said. "And traditions are hard to break." Molly set the scroll down, her hands shaking. "Jude was left to die because of a lie." "Yes," her voice cracked. "How many others?" Curtis's jaw tightened. "Too many." Molly closed her eyes, and for the first time since Curtis had met her, she looked like she might break. Curtis stood and moved around the desk. He crouched in front of her, his presence steady, grounding. "Molly," he said quietly. She opened her eyes. "This isn't your fault," Curtis said, "and you saved him. You didn't just find Jude, you fought for him. You stood in front of a council and refused to back down. That matters." Molly's breath hitched. "It doesn't feel like enough. It's more than anyone else did." Their faces were close now. Close enough that Curtis could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. Close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. He should have stepped back. He didn't. "You're different," Molly said softly. "Different how?" "I expected a king, but you're—" She trailed off, searching for the words. "You're kind." Curtis's chest tightened. "Don't give me too much credit. I'm not. I'm just being honest." Curtis reached up slowly, carefully, and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. The gesture was gentle, deliberate. Molly's breath caught. Curtis pulled back before the moment could stretch too far, but the air between them had changed. Something unspoken settled in the space they shared. "Get some rest," Curtis said, his voice rougher than intended. Molly stood, still shaken. "What happens now?" "Now," Curtis said, "I changed the law." He revealed the truth to the council the next day. The room erupted into chaos. Some members were outraged. Others were horrified by the implications. A few demanded further investigation. But Curtis stood firm. "We've been enforcing a lie for 200 years, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "And it ends now." Effective immediately, marked pups will no longer be rejected. Any pack that refuses entry to a marked pup will answer to me directly. Elder Burns rose, his face red. You cannot. I can, Curtis said. And I will. This is not a debate. The council fell silent. Curtis's authority, absolute and unwavering, filled the room. The meeting was adjourned, he said. As the council members filed out, Curtis remained standing at the head of the table. Ledger approached. That's going to create problems. I know. Some packs won't accept it. Then they'll learn to. Ledger studied him carefully. You've changed. Curtis glanced at him. For the better? Ledger smiled faintly. I think so. That night, Curtis found himself standing outside Molly's quarters. He didn't knock. He just stood there, wrestling with something he couldn't name. Inside, Molly sat by the window, staring out at the night sky. She didn't know Curtis was there, but she was thinking about him, and for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Just a quick moment because this part matters. If you're still here, that tells me this story has you in its grip, and I want you to know how much I appreciate that. I'm working toward my next subscriber goal on Jasmine Love Tales, and every single subscribe, like, and comment makes a real difference. If this story has stirred anger, hope, or something unexpected, please let me know in the comments. Now take a breath, because what happens next changes everything. Chapter 7. Curtis's decision didn't go quietly. Within days, 3 neighboring packs sent formal complaints. 2 council members resigned in protest. Rumors spread that Curtis had been manipulated by an Omega, that he'd lost his authority, that his judgment was compromised. Curtis ignored most of it, but the political pressure was mounting. Elder Burns, despite being sidelined, still held influence. He began gathering support among the older pack members, those who valued tradition above progress. The Alpha King is young, Burns told his followers. He's idealistic. He doesn't understand the consequences. Molly heard the whispers. She saw the stares. Some pack members treated her with open hostility now, blaming her for the upheaval. She didn't care except when it affected Jude. One afternoon, she was walking through the compound with Jude when a group of older wolves blocked their path. That's the marked pup, one of them muttered. Shouldn't even be here, another said. Molly stepped in front of Jude, her posture protective. Move. The wolves didn't budge. You've caused enough trouble, Omega, one of them said. Take your curse somewhere else. Molly's jaw tightened. He's not a curse, and neither am I. Before the situation could escalate, a familiar voice cut through the tension. Is there a problem here? Curtis appeared from around the corner, flanked by Ledger and 2 enforcers. The wolves immediately backed down, lowering their eyes. Curtis's gaze was ice. I suggest you find somewhere else to be. They scattered. Curtis turned to Molly. You all right? Fine, she said, though her hands were shaking. Curtis looked down at Jude, who was clinging to Molly's side. You okay, kid? Jude nodded. Curtis crouched to his level. No one's going to hurt you, I promise. Jude studied him seriously. You keep your promises? Always. Jude seemed satisfied with that. Curtis stood and glanced at Molly. Walk with me. Molly hesitated, then followed. They walked in silence through the compound, eventually reaching a quieter section near the gardens. Curtis stopped and turned to face her. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For what you're dealing with. For the backlash. I didn't think it would get this bad. Molly shook her head. You did the right thing. It doesn't feel right when you're being targeted. I've been targeted my whole life, Molly said quietly. I can handle it. Curtis stepped closer. You shouldn't have to. Molly looked up at him, And for a moment, the world felt smaller, just the two of them, standing in a pool of afternoon light. "Why do you care so much?" she asked softly. Curtis's expression shifted, something raw and honest flickering in his eyes. "Because you make me want to be better." Molly's breath caught. Curtis reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand. "I don't know what this is," he said quietly, "but I know I don't want to lose it." Molly's fingers tightened around his. "Neither do I." They stood there, holding on, the weight of everything unsaid pressing between them. But it wasn't heavy. It was grounding. Over the next week, Molly threw herself into helping Jude adjust. She also began volunteering in the kitchens, working alongside Paisley, who'd become a close friend. But the exhaustion was catching up with her. Years of surviving on scraps, the emotional toll of fighting for Jude, the constant vigilance, it all weighed on her. She pushed through it. She always did. Until one morning, she didn't. Paisley found her collapsed in the storage room, her body limp, her breathing shallow. "Get the Alpha King!" Paisley shouted. "Now!" Curtis arrived within minutes. He knelt beside Molly, his hands steady as he checked her pulse. It was weak but present. "She's exhausted," Paisley said, her voice shaking. "She's been pushing herself too hard." Curtis's jaw tightened. "Get the healer. Now." As Paisley ran off, Curtis carefully lifted Molly into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been. Too light. He carried her through the compound, ignoring the stairs, ignoring protocol, ignoring everything except the woman in his arms. He brought her to the medical wing and stayed while the healer examined her. "She needs rest," the healer said, "and proper meals. She's been running on empty for too long." Curtis nodded. "Make sure she has everything she needs." The healer left, and Curtis sat beside Molly's bed, watching her sleep. Her face was pale, but peaceful. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair away from her forehead, his touch gentle. "You're stubborn," he said softly, "and impossible. And I don't know what I'd do if something happened to you." Molly didn't wake, but her breathing steadied. Curtis stayed until morning. Chapter 8. Molly woke to sunlight filtering through a window. She blinked slowly, disoriented. This wasn't her room. The bed was softer, the air warmer. She turned her head and saw Curtis sitting in a chair beside her, his head resting against his hand, eyes closed. He'd fallen asleep watching over her. Molly's chest tightened. She tried to sit up, and the movement woke him. Curtis's eyes opened immediately, alert. "Don't move." "I'm fine," Molly said, though her voice was hoarse. "You collapsed. I just needed to rest." Curtis leaned forward, his expression serious. "You've been running yourself into the ground, Molly. You can't keep doing this." "I have to. Jude needs you alive," Curtis interrupted. "And so do I." Molly froze. Curtis exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not good at this. I don't know how to say things that matter. But I need you to understand, you matter. Not because of Jude, not because of what you've done. You matter because you're you." Molly's eyes stung. "Curtis." "I don't care about rank," he continued. "I don't care about tradition or what people think. I care about you." Molly's breath hitched. "I'm an Omega." "I know. I have no status, no power, no—" "You have everything I need," Curtis said quietly. "You're brave, stubborn, impossible, and you make me want to be the kind of leader I forgot I could be." Molly stared at him, tears spilling over. Curtis reached out and gently wiped them away with his thumb. "Stay," he said softly. "Not because you have to, but because you want to." Molly's voice cracked. "I want to." Curtis pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully, as if she might break. They stayed like that for a long time, the world outside fading into nothing. 2 days later, Curtis made his decision public. He called an assembly every pack member, every council member, every wolf within Tyler territory. The courtyard was packed. Curtis stood on the main platform, Molly beside him. The crowd murmured, confused. Curtis raised a hand, and silence fell. "I've spent 7 years upholding tradition," he began. "I've enforced laws, maintained order, and done everything expected of a king. But I've also realized something: tradition without compassion is cruelty, and I refuse to lead that way anymore." He gestured to Molly. "This is Molly Cohen. She's an Omega. She's also the woman who saved a marked pup when no one else would. She's the woman who stood before this council and demanded we do better. She's the woman who's shown me what true strength looks like." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. Curtis's voice steadied. "And she's the woman I choose to stand beside, not because of her rank, but because of who she is." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elder Burns stood, his face red. "Alpha King, you cannot." "I can," Curtis said. "And I am." He turned to Molly, his expression soft. "I'm not asking you to be my queen. I'm asking you to be my partner, my equal, my choice." Molly's tears fell freely now. "Yes." Curtis smiled, really smiled, for the first time in years. He took her hand, lifted it, and kissed her knuckles. The crowd erupted, some in shock, some in joy, some in outrage. Curtis didn't care. He'd made his choice. And for the first time in 7 years, he felt free. Chapter 9. The weeks that followed weren't easy. There was resistance. There were protests. Some pack members left, unwilling to accept the changes Curtis had made, but more stayed. And slowly, things began to shift. Marked pups were no longer rejected. Omegas were given voices in council meetings. Laws were questioned, revised, and rewritten. Curtis led the change, but Molly stood beside him, offering wisdom, perspective, and the kind of stubborn compassion that didn't bend. Jude thrived. He made friends, attended lessons, and slowly began to shed the fear that had clung to him for so long. One evening, Curtis found Molly sitting in the gardens, watching the sunset. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You've been quiet today," he said. "I've been thinking." "About what?" Molly smiled. "About how strange life is. A year ago, I was alone, freezing, convinced I'd never belong anywhere." Curtis took her hand. "And now? Now I'm sitting beside a king who carried me through his compound and told his entire pack he chose me." Curtis grinned. "I did, didn't I?" "You did. Do you regret it?" Molly looked at him, her expression soft. "Not for a second." Curtis leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "Good, because I'm not letting you go. I wasn't planning on leaving." They kissed slow, tender, full of promise. When they pulled back, Curtis smiled. "You know, Jude asked me something today." "What?" "He asked if we were going to get married." Molly laughed. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I was working on it." Molly raised an eyebrow. "Are you?" Curtis pulled a small ring from his pocket, simple, silver, engraved with a protective sigil. "I've been carrying this for a week," he admitted, waiting for the right moment. Molly's breath caught. Curtis held the ring between them. "Molly Cohen, will you marry me? Not because I'm a king, but because I love you." Molly's tears returned, but this time they were joyful. "Yes." Curtis slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed again, deeper this time, full of everything they'd fought for. In the distance, Jude watched from a window, grinning. He turned to Paisley, who stood beside him. "I told you they'd figure it out." Paisley laughed. "You were right." Jude looked back at the couple in the garden. "Do you think they'll let me be at the wedding?" "I think you're going to be the most important part." Jude smiled, wider than he had in years, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't marked by rejection. Every pack had rejected the marked pup, but an Omega's sacrifice had changed his destiny. He was marked by love, and so was Molly, and so was Curtis. Together, they'd rewritten destiny, not with power, but with choice. If you made it all the way here, thank you. Stories like this remind us that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it kneels in the snow and refuses to look away. If every pack rejected the marked pup, an Omega's sacrifice changed his destiny moved you. Please subscribe to Jasmine Love Tales, hit like, and leave a comment sharing what part of the story stayed with you the most. I'm working toward my next major milestone, and you being here means more than you know. Until the next story, stay sharp, stay curious, and remember, even the quietest hearts can change empires.